Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and with the war over, Hancock will see action on the Great Plains and run into many problems involving the Native American tribes living there and with his own command. After the controversial hanging of Mary Surratt, the Middle Military Division became the Middle Military Department, and Hancock had to move his headquarters to Baltimore, Maryland. For the rest of 1865 and into 1866, Hancock performed the duties he had become accustomed to before the war, garrison duty. He allocated troops, helped soothe unrest, and made trips to inspect garrisons. Elmira made the journey to Baltimore and spent that time with her husband, making up for lost time that the war had taken away from them. One piece of business that Hancock took care of while the head of the department was obtaining a pardon from the Attorney General for his friend from California, Joseph Lancaster Brant, who had joined the Confederacy and obtained the rank of Brigadier General. Those high-ranking Confederate officials had to apply individually for pardons, and it was Hancock who lobbied on his friend's behalf. Another friend who made an appearance in Hancock's life was Harry Heath. The Virginian had to travel to Baltimore on business, and Winfield and Elmira insisted that he stay with them. He did, and the two generals from the opposing sides of the conflict conversed with one another as if nothing had happened. They did some playful arguing about the Battle of Reams Station and Hatcher's Run, where they had commanded the two opposing sides and generally had a great time with one another. No war could dismantle their friendship. Before Heath left, Hancock informed him that he owed the ex-Confederate $1,000. Heath, who had lost money while supporting the losing side in the conflict, thought this was a form of charity on Winfield's behalf. But the Pennsylvanian showed Heath in his ledger book that through their various business dealings in the 1850s, that he owed him $1,000. After the proof in black and white, Heath accepted the money. As the Union armies dissolved and the regular army emerged once again, Congress reorganized it to contain 54,000 men, a drastic increase from the 16,000 in the regular army before the war. However, there was more need for troops with the occupation of the South and to deal with Native Americans in the West. Therefore, basically two armies came into existence, one to deal with the South and one to deal with the West. William Tecumseh Sherman became the commander for the armies in the West, protecting white settlers who were traveling across the overland routes to the West Coast. Sherman wrote to Grant that he needed a young general who can travel and see with his own eyes, and if need be, command both whites and Indians to keep the peace, and he specifically mentioned Hancock as that commander, adding, "Baltimore is no place for him." Also during this time, Grant got moved to general of the regular army, placing Sherman as lieutenant general, and that left a space open for Major General in the regular army. There may have been some discussions, but there was only one choice most people agreed on, that Hancock should have that spot, and that is exactly what happened. In August, Hancock would take command of the military department of the Missouri, so he moved his family west to Fort Leavenworth. In late January of the next year, 1867, Hancock's father was ailing, and the family feared he was close to death. So Winfield obtained permission to go on leave to visit his father in Norristown, Pennsylvania, and arrived before he passed. On February 1st, 1867, Benjamin Franklin Hancock passed away and was buried in Montgomery Cemetery. After the funeral, Hancock consoled his mother and then headed back to Fort Leavenworth for a proposed expedition to Kansas. Fear spread throughout the West that Native Americans were being heavily armed by white merchants and planned on uprising. Sherman and Hancock met at the former's headquarters in St. Louis to discuss the expedition. Sherman stated that he wanted Hancock to organize out of the present command a sufficient force to go among the Cheyennes, Arapahoes, Kiowas, and other similar bands of Indians and notify them that if they want war, they can have it now, but if they decline the offer, then impress on them that they must stop their insolence and threats. Hancock assembled about 1,400 soldiers, elements of the 37th Infantry Regiment, the 7th Cavalry, and an artillery battery. On March 26, the force commanded by Hancock moved out from Fort Riley and headed deeper into Kansas. Colonel Andrew Jackson Smith commanded both the cavalry and the district through which the expedition moved, but while he did the paperwork, the cavalry work was done by his lieutenant colonel, George Armstrong Custer. Custer and Hancock had known one another since the Peninsula Campaign. On April 7th, the group made it to Fort Larned, a vital fort on the trail to New Mexico, and it was there that Hancock was to meet with some of the principal chiefs of the Southern Cheyennes. A snowstorm delayed the chiefs one day, then a passing buffalo herd, which they determined to hunt, delayed them again. It was the evening of April 12th before two chiefs, Tall Bull and White Horse, along with 10 or 12 braves, made it to Larned for the council. Hancock grew suspicious at the lateness and the meager attendance. "Now I have a great many soldiers," Hancock said. "More than all the tribes put together. I intend not only to visit you here, but my troops will remain among you to see that the peace and safety of the plains is preserved." Then he said, "I have heard that a great many Indians want to fight. Very well, we are here. We came prepared for war. If you are for peace, you know the conditions. If you are for war, look out for its consequences." He emphasized the importance of keeping treaties made with us and letting the white man travel unmolested. "I will await the end of this council to see whether you want war or peace." He also informed the two chiefs that he intended to march to their village to talk to more chiefs. Tall Bull replied with a dim outlook on their own situation because of the destruction of the bison and diminished numbers of their tribe. With that, the meeting ended. The next morning, April 13th, Hancock headed up the Pawnee Fork toward the village and camped about 20 miles from Fort Larned. That night, several Cheyenne chiefs in Pawnee Killer met with Hancock and arranged for a council to take place the next morning at 9 o'clock. The next morning came and no one came to meet with the general. At 9:30 a.m., Bull Bear, one of the Cheyenne chiefs, came into camp and informed him that the chiefs were on their way. Hancock did not like this lateness. He was a military man that prized punctuality, and this irked him. So he told Bull Bear that his force would march closer to the village and meet with them that night. The army had only made it a few miles before a large group of about 300 armed Native Americans came into view. They formed up into battle line, and so did Hancock's little army. They got to within a couple hundred yards of one another, and the tension grew. About 12 Indians rode toward the blue troops. Hancock, accompanied by Smith, Custer, and a few others, rode to meet them. Winfield asked if they wanted peace or war. The famous chief Roman Nose stated, "We don't want war. If we did, we would not come so close to your big guns." When Hancock asked why he had not come to Fort Larned, he replied, "My horses are poor, and every man that comes to me tell me a different story about your intentions." Hancock then informed the group that he would march closer to the village and meet with them that night. He did, and at about 5 p.m. several chiefs came to meet with Hancock. They told him that their women and children were scared and had already ran away. Winfield instructed the chiefs to bring the women and children back to the village. The chiefs left, and at 9:30 p.m., word was sent to Hancock that they had decided to flee with the women and children. Angry, Winfield told Custer to go surround the village, but when he made it to the encampment, all the Indians had already gone. All that was left was smoldering fires, empty lodges, and items not able to be carried. Hancock saw this as a disrespectful act, but not helping his case was that this was a peace-seeking mission. He ordered the village to be burned and any goods found to be captured property. Word spread throughout the tribes of the fire on Pawnee Fork, and attacks began to increase against white settlers as an outcome. The army then moved to Fort Dodge, where Hancock met with Kiowa and Arapaho chiefs, having better conversations with them about peace than with the Cheyenne. He urged them to stay south of the Arkansas River in order to stay away from the hostile Cheyenne and Sioux who were now attacking settlers. After leaving Fort Dodge, the group was met by the famed war chief Satanta. The chief assured Hancock that he wanted peace. As a gift, Hancock gave Satanta the overcoat, sash, and hat of a major general. Months later, Winfield was horrified to hear that Satanta led an attack on the herds of Fort Dodge wearing the regalia of a major general. Once Hancock returned to Leavenworth, he dealt with Native American uprisings by allocating troops to what was termed trouble areas, but the biggest problem he had was not with the Plains tribes, but with George Armstrong Custer. Hancock had dispatched the Cavalier across the plains to deal with the hostile Indians, but Custer pushed his men to the breaking point. Forced marches and poor planning led to desertions, and Custer's orders to shoot deserters lowered morale further. Add on to that, a soldier began drinking heavily, presumably from the hard duty, and committed suicide. This was already concerning, but to top it all off, Custer, without orders, leave, or authorization, abandoned his men at Fort Wallace and raced off to Fort Riley to see his wife. Hancock arrested and brought charges against him. Custer was found guilty and sentenced to 1-year suspension from the Army. However, before the verdict was handed down and before the summer ended, on August 26, 1867, Hancock was transferred by order of President Andrew Johnson to command the 5th Military District, encompassing Louisiana and Texas.